Hi, my name is Kendall Cahan, and in this video you'll see me turn this small bowl out of some Ambrosia Maple. And I'm going to start off by just drilling a hole with a Forstner bit so that I can reverse this onto some pin jaws, and that will leave the whole of the outside exposed so I can work on the whole thing. So I'll go ahead and just flatten off the bottom as well as the side just to get it running true. And here I'm using some dividers to mark the size of the foot. And I want this to be the exact same size as my chuck jaws that I'll be mounting this in. That way I can take the finished piece right out of the chuck without having to reverse it again to remove any jaw marks. I'll go ahead and start just shaping the outside with some rough cuts. So here I'll just make sure that the underside of the foot of the bowl is slightly concave. That way when you set the bowl down on a table, it's only resting on the outside perimeter of the foot. And here I'm just kind of softening the edge and rounding it over so it's more like a small bead on the bottom of the bowl. And here I'm using a square end scraper with a small burr on the end of the tool. I go back and forth between doing that on the grinder and rolling it with a burnisher. I think they both work pretty well, but I do think that you get a slightly better surface when you roll the burr with a carbide burnisher. And I'm going to go ahead and start sanding the outside of the bowl with some 120. I like to start with power sanding for my first grit, which is usually 120, and then after that I switch to hand sanding. So now I'll move on to 180 grit, and then I'll follow that up with 220. And one of the benefits of sanding by hand on this stage instead of using power here is that you can manipulate the abrasive a little bit better so that you can get into those fine details and corners like you see here. That just keeps the details looking nice and crisp. And then I'm going to just add a little bit of embellishment here to the bottom of the foot. And then as usual, I will finish this piece with beeswax and walnut oil. I put the beeswax on first, just kind of build up a little small layer of it, and then I use the heat from the friction to kind of melt that into the surface. And the rag that I'm using is soaked with walnut oil. Okay, so we'll go ahead and reverse the piece into the jaws. That way I can work on the inside. I tend to be a little bit aggressive when I'm hollowing out the inside of a bowl. I just like to get as much material out as possible, as quickly as possible, and then on my last couple of cuts, I will take a much lighter pass and just try to get the best surface I can before moving on to some kind of scraper. Okay, so this is a good point to go ahead and just check my depth and make sure that I haven't gone too far. And this looked about right. Just with practice, you tend to get a good idea of where you are, but it still pays to check. It's always good to test the curve of the inside of the ball with the lathe off. That way you can just get a better feel for any kind of bumps or undulations that are on the surface. So just quickly sanded there, I kind of blew past that part, but then I'm finishing the inside again with beeswax and walnut oil. And since the foot was the correct size for the jaws, there's no chuck marks, and that's the finished piece.